Hey folks, I'm live here on Saturday, October 17th, about 10:30 p.m. Just getting this done. I want to get this final election prediction video done. Um, I've been saying now for a couple months, I've done several of these videos. I think this is like the fourth one or so where I've talked about this upcoming election from several different points of view. And I wanted to just do a final one on it um, and show the reasons. I'm going to, talk about this from several different points of view. Of course, the astrology is going to be a big part of it, at least the timing, the dashas, all of that stuff, to show why I think what I do. But I'm also going to show the current polling, also some history and precedent, and things like that. So anyway, just start by saying that you know, it's interesting and a little bit tricky to do these kinds of election predictions. And, at this point, I will also just start by saying anyone could win. I mean, um, these things are very tricky at this point, not the least of which because they've gotten much more complicated, especially US elections, because you could have someone win, for example, the popular vote and get more votes, which is kind of like um, a sort of benchmark, who is the most popular person. Like if you're doing a sports, prediction, like who's going to win? Are you going to get it or are you not going to get it? Will it be this one or that one? It's pretty binary. Um, it's who has the most points at the end of the match, and it's pretty simple. But with elections, especially U.S. elections, it's very different. Um, Someone could get the most votes and not win because of weird election laws in the U.S. Electoral College. Again, it's easy to say that all of that should be factored in and those kinds of things. But the point is, it makes it tricky. Um, by the way, I didn't do a formal prediction in 2016 because we didn't have Hillary Clinton's birth chart, and I just didn't feel comfortable enough doing it. Um, and so, but the people who did predict that she would win, you could forgive them for, quote, getting it wrong. She got 3 million more votes than he did. But because of our election laws, he wound up prevailing. Now, you could fairly say, well, but that's the prediction. Who winds up winning the presidency? Fair point. Absolutely fair point. Um, but I'm just saying that it's quite tricky. Um, and, I'm not going to talk about those kinds of things very much here, but I do just want that to be kept in mind a little bit that, um, it's not as cut and dried as one might think to look at these things, especially now, because there's a lot of things that could happen between now and when a verdict is decided. Now, I want to start by looking at this, a couple things that are interesting that I talked about in earlier videos. I'm going to kind of pull some things together because I've done, like I say, about 4 other videos on this, and I'm going to kind of bring them together here. By the way, you all are free to comment. I'm not looking at any comments. I got too much to pay attention to here, so that's just that. All right, so you can see here that there's a man named Alan Lichtman who has predicted the last, I don't know, 5 or 6, if not more, elections based on a set of criteria. Without going that in depth into it, he actually predicted that Trump would win in 2016. He's predicted all of the, victors for the last several elections based on many criteria. For example, incumbency, popularity, third-party challenger, if there were any major foreign, wars or incursions, etc., etc. And he judged based on these criteria that have predicted pretty much every election for 30 years that Biden would win. He was even quite generous with a couple of the criteria, which I felt he could have given a couple of these also at least one extra one to Biden. But based on these criteria, Alan Lichtman predicted a Biden win in, several months ago, based on these very predictable criteria. Again, things such as, no sustained unrest, incumbent administration doesn't have a major scandal. The incumbents in elections have a much greater advantage going into an election if you're already an incumbent. This is why most presidents are 2 terms, all the way back to Reagan. The only president who hasn't been 2 terms was George Bush the first. Part of that is because he was almost like Reagan's 3rd term as well. But presidents are usually 2 terms. Many of them are, even back to like Nixon, I should say. Nixon was 2 terms, and then Carter was 1, but then Reagan, then you had George Bush, and then Clinton, George Bush II, Obama. Incumbents have a great advantage. In 2016, there were no incumbents, so it was much more of an even field. And so there wasn't an incumbent advantage. There was a whole bunch of things. But again, I don't want to get too in the weeds with all of that, but this is also something that I wanted to show, is with the transits through the last, this is the last 5 U.S. elections with Jupiter and Sagittarius like we have now. And these are the last 5 elections with Jupiter and Sagittarius. 1960, this was Kennedy's first term. 1972 was Nixon, an incumbent who wins by a landslide. So this is a Republican incumbent who wins by a landslide in 72. Next one, 1984, Reagan, also a Republican incumbent, wins by a landslide. 1996, Clinton, also an incumbent. He wasn't a Republican, but he was, by that time, almost won. He had shifted the Democratic Party so far to the right, he might as well have been a Republican. Wins by a landslide. And then 2008, Obama's first term. So you see that in the last 5 U.S. elections, 1960, we had a very inspiring young Democrat. 2008, we had an inspiring young Democrat. In between, we had incumbents winning by a landslide. So 2020, this was something I said months ago, that history shows the incumbent wins by a landslide to be the most likely, which would favor Trump, kind of just going into it. And I said this, back in June or something like that. But may also show a new, possibly young and inspiring leader like a Kennedy or Obama. That's out of the question, at least the young part. Now again, but it could show like a resurgent youth movement or a resurgent sense of optimism or something like that. But this is some interesting background. And again, this is just background. It doesn't really go much to the prediction that I make, because I'm really looking at the astrology when I make the prediction. But it's interesting to also notice these things, and I do consider things like this just in general because I'm also interested in it. Oops, let me see. Cancel. So yeah, let me bring up the charts now. So again, with the charts that we have, I have Biden's chart here and Trump's chart here, and then on the right over here, I have the chart of election day, okay? And so I want to just go through, first I'm going to start with like the current Dasas, and I'm going to go through, the current Dasas, then I'm going to go through the transits of Saturn, of the nodes, of Mars, of the moon on that day. Those are going to be the primary ones. I'll also probably hit on the sun. The sun is kind of a neutral transit, but you'll see with these transits as well that there's going to be a favor here that once, starts to look better. So if we start with, we'll just go through the current Dasas, and we'll start with Trump's Dasas right now. Trump is in Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and particularly once his Jupiter, Saturn started, January 2019, that's when Jupiter Saturn started, January 3rd. Now this was the exact, I think it was to the exact day that Nancy Pelosi became the Speaker of the House, and he started to meet with enormous opposition. Again, this is Saturn. If you look at his chart, Saturn is his 6th and 7th lord. And again, Saturn is like, consequences, obstacles, things that can really obstruct you. And you can see, again, he started his presidency in Jupiter, But then Jupiter Saturn, he started to meet with enormous resistance, consequences, scandal, even impeachment. And again, it's easy to think that, well, he gets away with everything and nothing ever happens. But again, this isn't the right way to look at it. You're looking at this like, has this been better or worse or easier or what? It's definitely not been easier since January 2019. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but we also see where he is now on the third level dasha is Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, which started early September of this year. And since then, and we're going to look at poll numbers in a bit, but since then, since Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, it's done nothing but tank. This was right after the Republican convention when people were expecting, okay, now he's going to close the gap. Now he's going to come back and close the gap because he was behind in polling big time, and everybody's waiting for him to like close the gap. Here it comes, the big comeback. It's not happened. It's just gotten worse since then. We'll look at poll numbers to see. But this is also right around the time when that Bob Woodward, those tapes came out where we hear him talking about always knowing that COVID was there, was dangerous, and then coming out and not saying anything. It's just been worse. It's gotten worse upon worse since early September, including getting COVID, this disastrous first debate performance. He has done nothing but tank more and more. This also includes things like family members coming out against him, former cabinet members, like everyone descending upon him since this happened. This is his third level dasha. So this is the dasha that he's in right now, and the dasha that he's trying to win. So again, in some ways you're looking at this person against the other person. And again, this is why I say it can be a little tricky, because you can see now the other person, we have to look at his dashas. And we're seeing which one is stronger, which one has more opportunity to maybe win, okay? And we can start with the history, which we're doing now, and then I'm going to go back and tease out the specifics of it. But let's look at the history of Biden's in his current dasha. So his current dasha is Jupiter, Rahu, Jupiter. Now his Jupiter, Rahu started right as he became the nominee. Again, in early this year, he was kind of left for dead. And then he kind of suddenly rose from the dead and became the nominee. Since April 27th, when he started Jupiter, Rahu, since end of April, let's say, he's been at the height of his power. Jupiter, Rahu has been very powerful for him. So again, this is one of the first things that you look at is what's their current cycle and what's happened since it started. Trump won the presidency in Rahu Mars. He started it in Jupiter. And since he's been in Jupiter Saturn, his current cycle, it's just gotten worse. And even worse still, since he started his tertiary level. Since Jupiter Saturn Mars has gotten even worse. Biden, on the other hand, his current dasha, Jupiter Rahu, has gotten much better for him. This is when he became the nominee. So you can see one is on the ascent, one is on the descent, just based on the dashas before we look at the karmas. So it's very clear, and he's in Jupiter, Rahu, Jupiter on election day. So Biden is in Jupiter, Rahu, Jupiter right away, just looking at what's been benefit or not. Since the current dashas, we can see that it's been much more favorable for Biden than it has been for Trump since then, which doesn't necessarily have to be the case. It could have been even in Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Trump stages a big comeback. Or back when Rahu, changed signs. We have a bunch of transits that I'm going to be looking at. These things could have benefited, either man, but it really hasn't at this point based on the dashas. So let's look at Trump's dashas and what is activated in these dasha cycles as well. So again, Jupiter is his first level dasha, which is his 5th and 8th lord, and Jupiter is also the ruler of Saturn and Venus in the 12th house. Again, it's not the greatest dasha cycle for him as far as improvement in his life, because Jupiter is also retrograde in the 2nd house. This is why the presidency has had such a highlight on potential scandal, miscommunication, even courts and things like that with Jupiter. All the taking people to court, constantly in court over everything. We've never seen so much litigation in a presidency. And so Jupiter rules these two planets in the 12th house especially. And Saturn is the 6th and the 7th house ruler. Jupiter is also the 8th house ruler, which also has to do with a lot of change and transformation. The real power of this cycle, though, and why Trump has been able to prevail in many situations is that he has a very powerful, what's called Viparit Raja Yoga, which is Saturn is the 6th house ruler in the 12th house, which, again, I did a whole video about this you might want to watch, where it said something like, why does Trump win even when he loses? And this is a classical result of a Viparit Raja Yoga, where the 6th house ruler, which is our enemies and those who could often defeat us, that ruler, the 6th lord, goes into the 12th house, which is things sort of disappearing, or they wind up, our enemies and adversaries wind up disappearing somehow, or becoming very weak, or becoming marginalized. Like in 2016, Trump's the person that he ran against, Hillary Clinton, wound up being very weak. So you wind up with weak enemies. The people that can defeat you are weaker than you. Some of it, and in fact, in his case for sure, is also he knows how to weaken them. One of the ways he weakens them is things like lying, which is 12th house. 6th lord goes into the 12th. You can say all kinds of things about your opponents, spread lies, call them names, confuse them, or confuse everybody about them, and you prevail. So this is one of the great master strategies that he's able to deploy against his enemies. We saw it in the Republican primaries in 2016, in the election in 2016, and in fact, even though he lost, he wound up winning. Even though 3 million more people voted for his opponent, he wound up prevailing because of ways that, frankly, the other thing about the 6th lord and the 12th house is also dishonesty, cheating. That's what the 12th house is as well. And by the way, this is big in this election. He's already talking about how it's going to be rigged, and he's preparing everyone for the fact that they cheated me, and and that's already the strategy. He's been saying it for months already. He's talking like someone who knows that he's going to lose, or he's not going to get the votes. You wouldn't be saying all of this stuff if you thought you were going to win. Oh, it's going to be rigged. Don't believe the results. Well, you wouldn't say that if you thought you were going to win. You would say that if you were almost certain you were going to lose. So these are things that have this Saturn as the 6th house ruler in the 12th house in his natal chart gives him a kind of superpower of being able to do that. So this is where Trump's dashas are in this regard. And if we look at Biden, we can go here, and we see Biden is Jupiter Rahu right now. And again, his Jupiter dasha is, Jupiter is 9th house ruler, or I'm sorry, it's the 5th house ruler in the 9th. It's also the 2nd house ruler in the 9th. It's in its exalted place. It's retrograde. And again, it's highly exalted. Now again, and it's also retrograde. It's easy to think that retrograde is, quote, bad, so to speak, because it's, sort of backing up. Hang on a second. But it's very bright in the sky, and it's like a beacon up there. And so his Jupiter dasha, you can go back and see from the beginning. This was right when he became, you can see how his Jupiter dasha has been, vice president, very elevated since his Jupiter dasha began. And so, Jupiter is also the ruler of his Mercury in the 12th house, which is the 8th and the 11th lord. But we also have Rahu subdasha. Now, Rahu is the ruler of Shatabishak, which is his Ketu in the 4th house. It's the ruler of that. And it's also the ruler of his Mars, his ruling planet in the 12th house. So Rahu is a very strong identity planet for him. as well. It's activating his Lugna Lord, his ruling planet. This is why we saw when Jupiter Rahu started, it really catapulted him to favor. I also have to look at the D10, excuse me, and I'll go back and look at Trump's as well. But the D10 as well, we see Jupiter in the D10 is in its own sign for Biden. Now, it's in the 6th house, and of course, if you want to consider the motion in the harmonic chart, then you can. But at the very least, it's in Pisces, which again, this shows why this time has been powerful all around. It's been difficult for other things, like with his children and whatnot. But we also see Rahu is in the ascendant here in the D10, if this time is correct. Now, I haven't rectified it, and it could be off a little bit. So I'm hesitant to give a lot of favor here. But if this time is correct, Rahu in the ascendant would be very powerful for delivering, benefit. Okay, so Jupiter, Rahu, Jupiter, the 3rd level. Again, the 3rd level just brings out the enhanced power of Jupiter as well. So again, this is a very favorable dasha for Biden all around. When you compare it to Trump's Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and again, even just what we've seen the process, this process taking place. Now, he won the presidency in Mars Rahu. Or I'm sorry, Rahu Mars. That's when Trump won. So we could see Rahu in Trump's D10 is also in the 1st house. So Trump won the presidency in Rahu Mars, again, and his Mars is the ruler of the 10th Lord up here. So you can see why Trump's, the dasha where he won the presidency, Rahu Mars, is very powerful. Now he's in Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and if you look at, again, the power of the planets through which he won the presidency, this is for Trump. He wins it in Rahu Mars. Again, Mars is in the 12th house here, but Mars is also the ruler of Mercury, the 9th Lord. It's also the ruler of Ketu Moon, the 10th Lord, in the D10. Rahu is in the 1st house. So Rahu Mars is very powerful in the D10. If you compare it to the dashas now, Jupiter is, again, it's debilitated here. It's the 3rd and 6th Lord debilitated. Jupiter, Saturn. Again, Saturn is the Raja Yoga Karaka, but it's in the 6th house with Venus. Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and then Mars is in the 12th. It's still ruling the 10th house, but now it's the 3rd level dasha down. Again, everything's not the same. Mars as the subdasha planet in Rahu, Mahadasha, is still quite powerful because the Mahadasha planet is so powerful, because Rahu is so powerful here. Mars as a tertiary level ruler under Jupiter, Saturn, is just not as strong. You can see it very clearly. So Jupiter, Saturn is just not as strong. The strongest part of it is what I already mentioned. It's why I talked about it, which is the ability to win even when you lose. And by the way, this is the same thing that happens like with a bankruptcy. It's like everybody else loses, but you also wind up losing because you can't get credit and all other kinds of things. But bankruptcies it's not a victory. You have destroyed a business. And so that your creditors are protected, you declare bankruptcy, but then you screw your credit up as well. So his dashas, when you look at the dashas between Trump and Biden here, it's just very hard to see where Trump's dashas are better for what they're trying to deliver here. Again, if you look at at Jupiter, Saturn in general, Jupiter's retrograde in the 2nd. Again, it's not in good dignity. Biden's Jupiter is also retrograde, but it's in the 9th house, and it's also the 2nd. It's also the 2nd and the 5th Lord. Whereas with Trump, Jupiter is also the 8th Lord, and again, it's a powerful planet for Leo. For both Scorpio and Leo, Jupiter is the 5th house Lord, but for Leo, it's also the 8th house Lord, which 8th house is loss, catastrophe, difficulty. And there's a difficult aspect from Mars onto his Jupiter on election day, which I'll get to. But it's very hard to see where Jupiter, Saturn for Trump. It's certainly not as strong as Rahu Mars, which he won, but it's hard to see how Jupiter Saturn in the Rashi chart, in the Dasas chart, is as powerful as Biden's Jupiter Rahu. Again, his Jupiter is, it's the second and fifth lord in the ninth. It's highly exalted. Jupiter is also, now again, it's the ruler of his eighth lord, but also his 11th lord, Mercury. And again, in the Dasas, it's in the sixth house, but it's in its own sign of Pisces, which literally just shows a lot of hard work, which he has been. His Jupiter Dasha, he's been vice president. That's what he's done. So it's obviously been also been an auspicious cycle. But again, especially Rahu as well. Rahu is in the ascendant, in the Dasas, which again, even just looking at what we're talking about since his Jupiter Rahu started, it tracks that his Rahu would be powerful in the Dasas. So this also makes sense. As soon as his Jupiter Rahu started, he became the nominee. And again, it's ruling Ketu in the fourth. It's also ruling his Lagna Lord in the 12th. So these dashas definitely seem to favor Biden. By the way, I said this the first time I did their analysis as well. So when we look at transits, the first transits that really stick out is this Saturn, because this is going to be a common transit for both of them as well. Now, if we look at it from Biden's chart, again, this is an exact opposition to Biden's retrograde Jupiter. Saturn is an exact opposition to that Jupiter. Now, again, you might say, well, that's not good. It can be difficult, but everything that happens in your life that brings achievement has some Saturn quality to it. It's definitely not unusual to see Saturn interacting with these charts like we're seeing. Both of them could win, and both of them are dealing with all this pressure right now, so Saturn is going to be involved. You're going to see it somewhere in their charts. With Biden, it's aspecting his exalted Jupiter in the ninth. That's the kind of energy you want from Saturn. Again, we got to get out of the idea that Saturn is just bringing something bad. It could be. Saturn is just consequences. And those consequences can deliver great results if it's hitting something like an exalted Jupiter in the ninth house, which is what Saturn is aspecting by transit here. Now, again, when we look at Trump's chart, it's hitting, first of all, his Venus, this exact opposite to his Venus, which is also his 10th lord in the 12th. This is a very different transit. Now Saturn is putting this bang and drishti, this really hard aspect, on his 10th lord in the 12th. Again, 10th lord in the 12th. This is the quality of Donald Trump, who has had a bunch of different careers. Again, we keep talking, you hear the thing about Biden. The hit against Biden has been, you've been there 37 years, and I've done more in 37 months than you've done in 37 years. Okay, fair enough. But Biden's 37 years right now, that Saturn aspecting that Jupiter in the ninth is like saying, am I going to hurt you because of your 37 years, or am I going to help you? By contrast, Donald Trump has had 10,000 careers. Literally. I mean, he's like real estate, he's in branding, he's in TV, he's in golf courses. His career has been all over the place. Oh, and also president. So his career has had so many ups and downs and changes. He's got the 10th lord in the 12th. It's a functional malefic, Venus is. Venus is not a powerful planet for Leo. It's a functional malefic. And in this case, I mean, it doesn't mean it can't give good results. It certainly can. But it's definitely not like Jupiter is for Scorpio. It's not the 2nd and 5th lord in the 9th, exalted. So again, in Biden's case, this Saturn, this powerful Saturn, this is Saturn in Capricorn, which is saying you're getting the fruits of your labor here, because Saturn in Capricorn is really delivering the results here. It's really giving the full juice, which means now it's also given the full juice to Trump's 10th lord in the 12th. Again, the 10th lord is your career, it's your work. This is hard on that 10th lord in the 12th. Again, it's very hard for me to see this as being more favorable for Trump. Now, it's also aspecting his Saturn in the 12th. By the way, I did a video on this as well a while ago, and it was that this same transit, the last time this transit came around, like 30 years ago, is when Trump started having all of his bankruptcies. This is literally the transit when he started getting bankruptcies. When Saturn went through Capricorn the last time, by the end of it, he had declared like 4 bankruptcies. So this transit of Saturn through Capricorn is the same transit of Donald Trump and his bankruptcies. It's the same one, like in the early 90s. So, again, you have to go back and look at historical precedent as well. So the last time this transit came around, that happened for Trump as well. So again, this transit of Saturn, not very favorable for him. For Biden, again, we can just see even what's been happening since his Jupiter Rahu. Saturn has been aspecting this Jupiter, and again, it makes for a lot of stress, but when you get Saturn aspecting something that's powerful like this, again, this is what makes results happen. Saturn is really the one that gets you focused and concentrating and determined. And so, again, we've seen this benefit. And by the way, this aspect has been going on for the last year. Since Saturn moved into the end of Capricorn, the first time Saturn moved into the end of Capricorn was the end of January. And since that time, Donald Trump was impeached. Now, he wasn't removed from office, but he was impeached. The last time when Saturn went through here the first time was when Trump was getting impeached. Okay, and since then, again, what's happened with Biden is he's become the Democratic nominee. So again, you can also just look and see the life that's been happening. Not just getting impeached, but so much disrespect now. Look at, and again, I know there are people that don't like when I speak about this, but these are just facts. Look at all the former Trump chiefs of staff, family members. You have John Bolton, you have Mattis, you have John Kelly, you have his niece, you have his sister, just to name a few, just off the top of my head, who have come out and said he's the most corrupt person I've ever met, and all of this. Again, where is a precedent for this ever in your lifetime or any lifetime? When's the last time a sitting president who's trying to get reelected, has every person who knows him the best, his lawyer, Michael Cohen, who did all this stuff for him all those years, coming out just like he's a pathological liar? And I mean, when have we seen this before? This is not the dasha of someone who has all this luck. This is a vicious time. So again, whether you like him or not, I'm just being objective here. These are just facts. We can all see it. And this is what happens when Saturn opposes your Venus in the 12th. Venus is also how you treat people. How this is karma coming around. And we see it with this Saturn hitting his planets in the 12th, his Saturn Venus in the 12th, and Biden's ninth lord. Now again, there are people coming out against Biden as well, but Biden is continually getting elevated by this process. We can see it in the poll numbers and whatnot as well. So again, you don't have every person that's ever known Biden come out and say all this stuff. We're just not seeing the same thing. Okay, so we look at the Rahu transit. Hang on, let me take a drink here. So then the Rahu transit. So again, Rahu is going to go over. We'll start with Trump because it's going to be much more exact. Again, we can see this. Rahu just went into Trump's 10th house. This was a transit I was wondering what was going to happen as well, because it definitely could be very difficult, these returns, especially this one, because it's not only Rahu going over his natal Rahu and his sun, but also Ketu going over his moon. And we can see what's happened. I mean, now here, this is in a few weeks, but when Ketu was just 28 degrees, he got COVID. Since Rahu has gone into his 10th house, it hasn't been an improvement on anything. Again, it's just been the 10th house is like our reputation, our status. It could be our public glory or our public shame. 10th house is like your recognition. And Rahu can just bring enormous shame and consequences, and a fall from grace is what Rahu going over the sun can definitely mean. And Trump has had many falls from grace in his life. Again, he's also prevailed many times. It's true. But again, I remember Trump a long time ago. when all the bankruptcies happen, and he's been not a laughing stock because he's also been a celebrity and a lot of people have liked him and whatever, but he's been in this up and down character forever. He's always been a bit of an object of derision and had been not shameful, but he's always been back and forth with being mocked a little bit. And again, so this Rahu sun in his natal chart shows this potential to be excessive and over the top, and the potential for that to not just be something that allows you to win all the time. So since Rahu has gone into his 10th house, it has not been favorable. Again, that happened in September, and it's just been steadily harder for him. And again, we're going to look at polling data to show you this in a second. But again, part of it is also Ketu going over the moon, and this Ketu transit is harder for him. Ketu is going over a debilitated planet. It's going over his debilitated moon. Now again, Biden also has planets in the first, and we'll look at it. But you got Rahu going over, the sun is Sandhi, which again, the sun is powerful, but his sun, just like his status and reputation and career, is always, it's very unpredictable. It's unreliable, it's shocking and surprising. It's here at this very last degree, and it's shown the volatility. And again, with Ketu going over his moon in the fourth, this debilitated moon in the fourth, he just got COVID. And again, the fourth house is our lungs, it's our heart, and he just had, he probably caught pneumonia when he got COVID. That's why he had to get rushed to the hospital and had all these drugs. Seems to be better now. But this happened when Ketu went over his moon. Not the kind of transit that's like, oh, I can see him, winning an election that he's very far behind in right now. So if we look at the same transit for Biden, Rahu is going through his 7th house over his natal Saturn. I wouldn't say this is great, like, yay, you got Rahu going through here. But again, Rahu can bring a lot of power. And it certainly can, in this case, attach you to other people. It's not, I'm not saying it's really favorable, though, to be honest with you. So Rahu going through his 7th house and over his Saturn can also show some real problems with family, especially, and whatnot. This is why these scandals and all this buzz around his son, Hunter Biden, and all, and he's not by any means done with that kind of stuff. There were allegations, earlier in the campaign of the molestation charge with the woman, I forgot her name, wound up being much more ambiguous. But we might see some other things like that. No question, it could happen. He's definitely got this sort of creepy Joe sort of consequences coming out with him sniffing hair and looking like creepy Uncle Joe with kids and stuff. This is shown with this Saturn going through his 7th house over this, Rahu going through the 7th house over his natal Saturn. Again, he's not, he's not Obama. He's not that popular. He's a choice that looks safer, but it's not flowers and sunshine either. But it's not as difficult. Again, the Ketu going through his 1st house. First of all, it's much further away from his planets, and these degrees do matter. Ketu is at 26 on election day. His planets are much earlier, so it's not right on it. Where again, we look at Trump, it's still very close conjunction. So Ketu is still jacking his planets. And by the way, I think in many ways a lot of the worst news for Trump about the difficulty, a lot of it is past because Ketu has passed over this by now. It's cleared the degrees. But he's taken some major damage. He had a disastrous debate, and then he got COVID, and his numbers just plummeted since then. And that's when Ketu was right on his moon in the 4th, and having that natal Ketu. That's what happened when Ketu went over Trump's problematic 4th house. He had the terrible debate performance, and then since then he's just been dropping. Biden, it hasn't really affected as much, but it wouldn't hurt him as much because there's no debilitated planet there. Venus is a functional neutral for Scorpio. The sun, again, is the planet of power, but Ketu going over the sun is not exactly great either. So the nodal transit is, again, looks much worse for Trump just by what we can see. Just by the disgrace and the wild getting COVID. This is clearly shown by Ketu going through his 4th over his debilitated moon. And then we have the Mars transit as well on election day. Again, it sounds like a broken record here, but this is just much worse for Trump. First of all, it's going retrograde through his 8th house. If we look at Trump's chart, let's start here. Again, Trump has this Leo ascendant, and this Mars retrograde Mars is going through the 8th house, and it's aspecting his natal Jupiter. Pretty strong, pretty tight degree on election day. Again, that's his Mahadasha planet, and it's Mars is retrograde, having gone right over. And so again, this is not a helpful transit. Plus, it's going through his 8th house. This is what made his health issues so urgent. But I just don't see this as being more beneficial to Trump than to Biden. 8th house Mars transit is not strong. Now, it's the 5th house from the moon. That's also not a favorable Gochara position. But I don't really use those Gochara positions so much. Looking at this, I read transits from the ascendant. I also look at aspects by transit. But mostly what I'm looking at here is this opposition to his natal Jupiter, and the fact that it's going through his 8th house for Trump, which I don't know how you look at it, but Mars transiting the 8th house is just not as favorable. Now, Biden, again, this is Biden's ruling planet, for one thing. So Biden, Scorpio, is ruled by Mars, and the Mars is going through his 5th house. Again, it's retrograde. Retrograde planets can tend to, as we say, reverse things and whatnot. One might interpret that to mean that it's going to be like a reversal of fortune for him, something like that, perhaps. What I do see with the Mars, more than anything here, it's 21 degrees, is if you put the aspects by transit, Mars has an 8th house aspect, pretty tight aspect on his natal Mars and his Mercury in the 12th. So I think this can definitely show some delays in the final results of the election. Frankly, I don't think it's going to be that long. I don't think it's going to be this huge drawn-out process. This is I think it's going to be, there'll be some delays, and I think this Mars going through Biden's 5th house and aspecting the planets in the 12th are going to show delays. I also have to say, though, especially because we also have Mercury retrograde, and that Mercury turned retrograde right on Biden's Mars in the 12th, it could definitely show some surprises between now and election day. I don't want to say health problems, but there could definitely be some shocking surprises. I mean, we're at that time. But the way I see it now, all things considered, barring any very strange, unforeseen things, I think it looks more like just something that's going to cause delays in the final, analysis. Excuse me. Meaning that on election night, a few nights after, maybe even up to a week or so, we might not know. Frankly, I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to last that long, honestly, and I'll show you why when I get to the vote counts and stuff like that, polling and whatnot. But I think in general, this just is much less harmful for Biden than it is for Trump. Mars going through his 8th house. It's also Trump's tertiary level planet. He's in Jupiter, Saturn, Mars. And that 3rd level planet is retrograde through his 8th house, aspecting his Jupiter in the 2nd house. Even just on that level, this 3rd level planet, this Mars, is not easy. You know what? I'm sorry. He's in Mars now, but on election day, it's Rahu. You know what? I'm sorry. God, I've been making that mistake. Excuse me. On election day, his 3rd level is Rahu. Sorry. I got to go back and clean that up. I should say that here between now and the end and like in 10 days, I'm recording this on the 17th, this Jupiter, Saturn, Mars can be really difficult. But then on election day, yes, he's in Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu. Sorry about that. And the thing is, I can't believe I forgot to say that because I already knew this, that it was going to be Rahu in the 3rd level. This actually this actually shows much more power also in his Dasamsha, which I meant to say. Excuse me. So, again, there's a lot to keep straight here. But, so this transit of Rahu going over his 10th house, since Rahu came in to his 10th house, I don't see where that where that transit has been so beneficial. And the fact that he's in Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, I don't see where that transit over the 10th house has been beneficial at this point. Rahu does rule his Mercury in the 11th house, though. And this is a powerful planet for him. So it does rule this Mercury in the 11th house. So again, we could see, let's say after October, the end of October, there could be some new information that comes out that helps him close the gaps, close the polling gap a little bit, for sure. Hang on a second. Sorry about that. So again, this Rahu, this third level, Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, it's ruling Mercury and Ardra. That's what I'm saying here. And this Gemini makes him a good communicator, at least able to use language and words the way he wants. And even to just be very crafty and even deceptive if he needs to be. Same way with, it's also ruling, because Mercury is the ruler of Jupiter here. Mercury is a real kind of superpower that he has to help him get what he wants. So that Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu is definitely an improvement to Jupiter, Saturn, Mars on election day. And as you can also see in the Dasasha, it was Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu. Rahu in his first house in the Dasasha is probably the most powerful planet that he has to perhaps win. Again, is it enough? It's hard to say. I'll keep going, but just to double back on that. So it is Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu on election day for him. And that transit of Rahu through his 10th house, again, that's a favorable transit in general. But we also have to look at what has it shown so far. And it hasn't been favorable so far. It's been just, frankly, it's brought a lot of disgrace. I want to say something else about this transit of Rahu because this is important. And I've talked about this from the beginning. I've talked about this since, I don't know, several months ago, that one of the main things that was going to decide this election was once Rahu moved out of Gemini and moved into Taurus, it was not going to benefit Trump because Rahu in Gemini was so chaotic with so much information and data and so much accusation, and that Rahu in Taurus is about stabilizing energy, being stable and calming down, being stable. And that prevailing idea was going to be maybe the most important deciding factor in the 2020 election. And Rahu in Taurus is showing this. It's just making Trump look more unstable. He looks more unstable. By contrast, it's very clear. Steady, boring Joe Biden is least stable and steady. We've had chaos, and Rahu in Taurus is collectively, we're like, okay, we want stable. And so just in general, aside from the two people's charts, and by the way, this is to the benefit of Biden even in the natal chart, because Biden has Saturn in Taurus, which is very stable. Trump has Rahu and then Sun at a very wobbly degree. Sun in transition, which is very unstable all the time with his power. He overdoes it. His power is unstable. Rahu goes over Biden's Saturn in Taurus. So just that transit in general is bringing about something that to me favors Biden. And I think it's showing that way, that people are, the polling is saying it, that people are looking for stable. Now, some people think Trump is the more stable, okay. But that idea of what's going to bring about stability is going to be a prevailing idea in what's making people vote. Some people think Trump is the most stable choice because Biden is just one of the radical socialists that's going to unleash mobs on the streets and all that. And maybe you think that. And there are people who are thinking that. And they're saying, no, I want to vote for Trump because I don't want all of that Antifa and all that. But this issue of stability is a big one. Okay? So in general, the transit of Rahu is favoring that stability. And according to polling and all of that now, this is definitely cutting in Biden's favor. So the last transit that I'll look at is the moon in both of their charts. And again, I have to just go back and say that I've tracked the moon the last couple months, and the people that have, or I'm sorry, the last two transits of Mars through Mrigashira Nakshatra, which is going to be the nakshatra that it's in when the election is, getting called. This is the chart again for September 3rd, about 11 o'clock, 11 something like that in DC. The moon's going to be in Mrigashira, and 2 months ago, when the moon went through Mrigashira, was the day that the Bob Woodward tapes were released. The Bob Woodward tapes were released. I think it was September the 9th or something. And that's the day that the moon went over Trump's sun and Rahu. It was that day. Because I was tracking it. I wanted to see what happens when the moon goes here, because this is where the moon's going to be on election night. What happened? Oh, that happened. That was not favorable. That was one of the worst. It's been one of the worst moments. It's been a bellwether moment in the campaign, is when Biden could credibly say he knew the whole time how dangerous this was. But then he got up and said, and told everybody, don't worry about it. Well, we're not scared. He's scared and all. I mean, it was a watershed moment. That was 2 months ago, or about a month and a half ago, when Rahu went through his 10th house, the same place it'll be on election night. And the last time it did it was when he got COVID, when he was literally emergency flown to the hospital. He was either in the hospital. I mean, he was in the hospital. Again, I did updates on this, but that was the last time. So the previous two times to election night, one is when the Bob Woodward tape was released. The second time, he had contracted COVID. He actually got COVID when the moon was here. It was in Pisces and then here, and then it went into Aries and here, and then he was in the hospital with COVID when the moon went over the last time. Definitely not the kind of transit that is like, yay, I'm going to win. That's not winning. But you also have to understand that it not only doesn't benefit Trump, but what doesn't benefit Trump helps Biden. So those stories coming out, again, anything that hurts your opponent helps you. So these things have been, this transit of the moon through this place where it's going to be on election night has been much more favorable to Biden the last two times. Again, 2 times ago was the day that the tapes were released. That was a huge boon to Biden. And this last time Trump had COVID. Again, definitely has helped Biden. So again, the transit of the moon, it's tricky to figure out, right? Because Trump's got these planets up here and it's very easy to think, oh, it's going through Trump's 10th house. Yeah, but his 10th house is very unstable. It's very hard to predict this for sure. And it's going right over his Rahu. Yeah, but again, that's very unstable. He's had huge losses before, and things have to line up perfectly with these Dasas, or else it's a horrific flame out for him. He's one or the other. And so far, the last 2 transits of the moon through there does not favor him. And I don't think it favors him in general. Again, because it's going to be in Taurus. It's this stability. Rahu is there, and we're wanting stability. So I don't think that's to his benefit in general. So I want to bring up this. I want to show a couple polling sites. As I said, I'm not looking at the chat. I don't care at this point. I'll go back and clean up later. I got too much to do here. All right, so we can see that if we look at what, this is also the nuts and bolts of what's going on. And I made a video a while ago about how I look at these things. People, I don't know, for some reason because people get all their information from news like, CNN or Fox or something. They think everybody does. I don't. I listen to news stories, but I get my data from places where there's data, like these polling aggregate sites. Again, 538 is an aggregate site where they aggregate polling data. And this is a visual representation of the race right now. And this orange is what Trump would have to win. Trump would have to win all of these states. And the blue is the Democrats. And as you can, and Biden. And as you can see at this point, if Biden wins these states up to Pennsylvania, he wins. That's mathematically impossible. Okay, Trump has to turn around these different states where he's been behind for the entire election season. And I'm going to show you these polling data and show you what I'm looking at. So if you click here, this is at 538.com, and you go down here, you see these polls are updated all the time. And if you look at these polling averages, you see this is Pennsylvania. This is the threshold right now where everything other than Pennsylvania is even a higher margin of victory or of a higher lead for Biden. But you can see that Biden has been ahead in this state by at least 4.5 points for months, all the way back here. This is this is since October. You can see how worse it's gotten. This was back in the Republican convention. It was about 5 points. This is back when I started making videos on it. And people are like, oh, he can come back. And I'm like, yeah, he could come back. And he could. He could come back now. But he's running out of time. And it's getting harder and harder to realistically think that he's going to close a 7-point gap when he's done nothing but lose now. Look at how it's been opening up. And he's never been ahead in pretty much all of these states. He's been behind the whole time. 7 points in Pennsylvania. Now again, you can say, well, he could do it. Okay, he could do it. But look at what else has to happen. Let's go back here and look. So, oops, come on. So, this is just the Pennsylvania here. That's like 7 points. But he's also losing Florida. Again, you can't lose Florida as a Republican and win the presidency. It's very hard. Look, Florida, 4 points. Look at, Florida has been closer. This was right after the Republican convention, was right here. The one state where Trump really started to close the gap was Florida. No other place did he do it, by the way, after the Republican convention. But in Florida, he closed the gap. And I've been watching this. He told get down to 1.8. It got close. But then we started getting into, this was around when the Woodward story hit. Then we got up to here. Now we start getting into these debates happened about right here. The debate, and then COVID, and then boom. Again, about 4 points. So again, you could say, well, he could still do it. Okay, but he's never been ahead yet. What is he going to say? What is he going to do? It gets harder and harder when you look at the numbers. And these are polls aggregated over months and months. I want to show you some other things. These other ones are the same way. These other states where Trump has never been ahead. Now you could say, well, he might do it. Again, Arizona, same thing. I'll just show you real quick, and then I'll show you some other states. Arizona, very similar. Trump has never been ahead, 4 points behind. Again, if Biden wins all of these states, even if Biden just wins every state that he's been ahead by 4 points on, let's say, now it's about 3.2. Sorry. Now it's about 3.2. Again, if Biden just and he's never been ahead. Trump has never been ahead in those states. If Biden just wins every state that he's ahead in by 3, where he's never been behind, if he just holds on to these, and again, remember, Trump has never really been leading in any of these states. Maybe he could do something, but let's say he doesn't. Let's just say Trump holds on to every state that he's been winning the entire time. I mean, Biden holds on to every state he's been winning the entire time. This is like 330 electoral college votes, and it is over. There is nothing to dispute. There's nothing to dispute. You can come out and say whatever you want. You just can't at that point. I haven't even talked about Georgia, where he's losing. But then even let's take a look. You just saw these states where Biden is ahead and has been the whole time. Let's look at a state like Texas. Texas, which is 38 votes, and this is usually an absolute mainstay. Texas is usually not even on the map in any election. But look at Texas. Now look at the way Texas looks. Trump is, well, look at how close Texas has been the whole time. Trump is only up by 1.3 in Texas. Texas! It's like, what? And Biden was ahead, but it's been neck and neck the whole time in Texas. You just saw the polling for Pennsylvania, Florida, and the other states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and those other ones that that Trump won in 2016. They're off the map. He's not coming back. He's too far behind. Almost 90%. You can't be 7-8 points back this close. It's so much to try to make up. But look, Trump is going to have a hard enough time just holding on to Texas. Trump is now, and we see it again if you watch this like I do, he's busting his butt to try to not lose Iowa. Look, Biden is up in Iowa. These polls, and again, these are aggregate polls, but you know they had Ohio, they have it leaning Trump, but I bet you Biden is still at. Okay, so Trump is 0.02, but again, look at how close these polls are. Just a few days ago, Biden was up. It's more likely. So again, when we start looking at the nuts and bolts of this race, and you start seeing what's going on. Well, yes, you could say, well, he might still come back and win Pennsylvania. No, Trump doesn't have to win Pennsylvania. Trump has to hold on to Texas, hold on to Iowa, hold on to Ohio, flip Georgia, flip North Carolina, Arizona, Florida, and then Pennsylvania. And he's never been ahead in any of these. He's been behind the whole time. Much of it's not even been that close. So again, this is just a reality as well that you should understand. This is when people are like, well, God knows he could come back. Oh, you never know. Well, there is data. We can look at data. Again, one more time, I'll just show you the difference, even just between Pennsylvania and Texas. Here's Pennsylvania, Biden's lead, not even close. What's going to happen? What is Trump going to say in the next couple weeks? And by the way, you should understand the way this snake chart works. These are even more solid. The further it gets in here, the more solid they are. This is 6.7. These end up being 7 and 8 points, and even more solid than Pennsylvania. So you contrast Pennsylvania with Texas, and it's been neck and neck the whole time. It's more likely that Biden wins Texas than Trump wins Pennsylvania at this point, just by the numbers. Now again, it doesn't mean it can't happen or something can't happen, but this is the reality at this point. And it really hasn't changed. In fact, if anything, at this time where it's supposed to be getting tighter, it's not. It's getting even more skewed. Now it could tighten up a lot more, and I expect that it will. I don't expect there's going to be this gigantic blowout where all of this is a gigantic blowout. I'm just saying, if he were to hang on even just to win these states that look pretty tight, and again, people who keep saying, well, there's 2016 and blah, blah, this was totally different at that time. I haven't even mentioned, by the way, national polling, which has Biden consistently about 10 points right now. It wasn't anything like that before. It was 2016 at this time, it was like 3 points. And these battleground states were about 4 or 5 points, and they had been going back and forth. They were very much toss-up. It just wasn't like this at all. Okay, so again, this is just another reality when people, if you're not looking at this kind of stuff and not looking at this polling, and you just hear people like, well, God, it could come back. Yeah, he could. But this is what we're looking at. This kind of situation where he's never been ahead, he's never been leading, and somehow he's going to now start saying something that's going to flip everybody. And we already know what they were hoping would happen. There was going to be this October surprise with Attorney General Barr. We already know what was going to happen. And Barr, that was coming out, Obamagate. Obamagate was going to come and blow up Biden. And this week Barr said, there's nothing there. And Trump got really mad. He's like, oh, Barr, you were supposed to come out and attack my political enemy for me. And Barr was like, sorry, there was nothing there. We looked at this, and Durham and whatnot, this whole Obamagate scandal that was supposed to blow up, that everybody was waiting for, sorry, it's not there. I was surprised. I thought Barr was going to come out with something. He didn't come out. He just said, nope, bye, nothing. Again, we have to look at this in the light of Trump winning or losing. Is he benefiting or not? These were the things that the 6th Lord in the 12th, that his 6th Lord in the 12th was going to hopefully deliver. These were the things I was thinking might come out. Like, again, he's got an Attorney General who is willing to go after his enemies. That's the 6th Lord in the 12th. I was expecting that Barr was going to release something that would look bad. He still might. Something might come out. I think Pompeo is like releasing Hillary Clinton emails. I don't know what they're doing. I don't think they know what they're doing. I think he knows he's going to lose. This is why he keeps talking about it's going to be rigged, and he wants it to be in the courts. Because I know that he sees this. He knows he's in deep trouble. He absolutely knows. That's why he keeps saying he's going to lose, that it's going to be rigged. If he thought it was going to win, he wouldn't say it would be rigged. But this October surprise that he had planned with Bill Barr and Obamagate fizzled. That's not there. Now this thing is coming out with Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, and we'll see what happens with that. I looked at it, and I don't know what crimes they think happened or whatever. But anyway, I don't want to get too into the weeds with all of that stuff. But what we're looking at here is that what's going to happen that's going to turn this around at this point to where it is now. And when I'm looking at Dasas, I'm definitely not seeing where, to me, there is, these Dasas are favoring Trump. It's showing exactly what it should have been showing since January of last year. It's gone worse and worse. I thought maybe the transit of Rahu over this, I wasn't sure. I didn't think it would be a great transit, particularly because also Ketu going through his 4th house and going over his debilitated moon, I didn't think that was going to be as favorable as going in Biden's 1st house. And it certainly wasn't as favorable. And I just don't see where he comes back. And so, yes, my prediction is that it's going to be Biden. And I also happen to think that it might not be this drawn out thing. I just showed you the numbers. I'm showing you what I'm looking at. Here's what could happen is on election night, again, there's going to be a lot of uncounted ballots and uncounted, things like that. And that could be an issue. But the other thing is that if everything has a kind of strata of reality. If something plays out like we see on that map I just showed you, election night, you're going to have Trump up in all of these states. He's going to be up in all of these states. There's going to be a percentage of uncounted votes, maybe 25 to 30% of uncounted votes or something. But if he's behind in all of these states, he doesn't even have a place to say, oh, I won. I mean, if Trump is trying to hang on to Texas and Ohio and Georgia on election night, which is much more likely than him flipping Pennsylvania and Florida and North Carolina, where he's never been ahead, it's going to be an entirely different thing. Now, again, he could come out, he can come out and, say all of these other things, about what can happen, and he's going to come out and say what he's going to say. But again, I just don't see where the dashas and the transits are showing, first of all, the power, where Trump's power is more than Biden's right now, for sure. I just showed you all of the dashas and my reasoning behind it. I also don't see where the transits are showing it. Again, the last 2 transits of the moon, which is the real transit that you look at that day, have been eviscerating for Trump. 2 vicious transits. And of course, that's to the benefit of Biden. And again, all of this is backed up in the polling that we're already seeing. We already see it. So I think, again, it might drag out a little bit, like it might drag out a few days, especially this retrograde Mars aspecting Biden's retrograde planets into 12th. It might, drag out for a few days before Trump concedes, or who knows if he will concede, who knows. But the overall mechanics of what I think could happen, it could be a bloodletting on election night. There's no question. Now, again, I expect it to tighten, but I don't expect, it's hard to imagine that he's going to come back and win all of those states where he's never been ahead. By the way, another thing to just to let you know about the realities of 2020 and 2016. In 2016, there were so many more undecided voters than there are now. At this time, I think in 2016 at this time, it was still like 14% undecided right up until the end of the election. Now it's much less. You even see it reflected in the polling. Like it's something like Biden 52, Trump 41 or something like that, which again, and then there's this winds up being, that's like over 90% have already said they're voting for one or the other. Others won't vote. Others will vote third party, and it winds up being maybe 4 or 5% are undecided. What needs to happen is Trump needs to win all of them. He's got to pick up every undecided voter. And traditionally what happens is undecided voters, the closer it gets to election, tend to break for the challenger. Again, Trump is the incumbent. There's a great advantage to the incumbent because you're running on your record, and the other person is running against your record. So the further it gets that people are undecided, the more they break for the challenger. Because if they were already decided on the incumbent, they would already know what they're getting. So the ones that hold back, undecideds always break more for the challenger, like what happened with Trump in 2016. I've seen some comments, I've been looking a little bit, but the silent majority, blah, blah. You know who the silent majority is this time? It ain't Trump supporters. They're not silent. It's the other people who have been sitting back and watching the craziness, and maybe we're not saying anything or arguing or fighting anymore, but we're like, yeah, whatever. The silent majority is actually the majority. The silent majority are the ones who are going to come out, and they're the majority. They're not on there arguing about it. They're just like, enough of this. And I think this is why I think there's so many absentee ballots already being mailed in and whatnot. So again, the point is that in 2016, Hillary Clinton was pretty much seen as an incumbent between the two, even though neither was a literal incumbent, because she was of the same party of the current administration and she represented the establishment. So this is why so many independents broke for Trump late. That wasn't shown so much in the polling. This time, that dynamic is not the same. So those of you who are saying, oh, Trump, he'll get it later, he'll come back. He got that in 2016 because he was the outsider. Now again, Biden's not the outsider, but Biden is not the incumbent. It's a vote against the incumbent that breaks late for the challenger. So I'm going to leave it at that. And so my prediction is Biden is going to win. I think it could be a thumping on election night. If not, maybe I'm wrong. And the way Trump can win is just exactly what he's trying to do. What he's trying to do, it could work. He's trying to say it's a hoax. He's trying to delay it. He's looking for any opportunity. What could happen on election night is any situation where perhaps there's a mathematical way to figure out that he's ahead on election night, and then he's going to say, I won, I won, I won, everybody stop, I won. Then pull something like that, maybe, or find any scenario through which to claim victory and then try to get into some thing in the courts or whatever. That's clearly what he's trying to do. It's not even a bold prediction at this point. It's pretty obvious. It's a great case study in the astrology actually showing this, though. The astrology is showing this. And it's also showing he's far behind, and he knows it. Believe me, these people, everybody, Trump looks at polls more than anyone else. He is addicted to polls. And so he knows this more than anyone else. So I think it's going to, it might draw out a little bit, but I think it's going to be, I think Biden he's clearly going to win the popular vote. I don't think there's any way Trump wins the popular vote. He might be able to steal it. I'm not thinking that, though. This kind of, he's set up for a trouncing. And by the way, let me just say this last thing. I know I keep saying last thing, but the Senate as well is very much in danger of going to the Democrats. And the senators already can see it. I heard Ted Cruz and who was the other one? Maybe Cornyn, one of the other senators saying we could get really thumped. We could get really thumped. The Republicans are in a panic because they know they've been in fealty to Donald Trump for 4 years, and they have this feeling, and the country has this feeling that they're all about to get flushed down the toilet here. They're definitely in danger of losing the Senate as well, and you see them jumping ship. I think this is also the reason why Bill Barr was like, nah, I'm not filing this thing. I'm not going to do that, and then you lose, and then I've done this. I think that people are abandoning ship here, and it's not sure what he's going to do to turn it around. So it could be a torrential thumping on election night. If not, things could drag out. That Mars retrograde, it could drag out. Things could happen. There's no question about it. That would be that would be worse. And if that happens, that would favor Trump more. And Trump would be benefited by fomenting chaos and all of this. And again, he could win it that way. That's the only way he wins. I'll just flat out say it like that. I don't think there's any way he gets more votes. I think there could be some chaotic way that he manages to, do that 6th Lord and the 12th and somehow, but again, I think what will happen is it's going to be a overwhelming victory, I think, at least in the states. Now we'll start to see it turn. I think it's going to get tighter, but I think on election night, again, if Trump even just holds what he has, including Pennsylvania and Florida, even just what he has and then Pennsylvania and Florida looks solid, that would be almost insurmountable. You can't win without Florida or even like North Carolina, and then these other states are being grappled with and nobody's sure. This is what I think could very well happen, is it's going to be very solid for what Biden is almost definitely going to win. And then even the states that Trump hopes to win aren't going to be settled. If something like that happens, it's just almost impossible to legitimately claim that it was stolen or something. Again, if Trump is trying to hold on to Texas and Ohio and Georgia, and Biden has solidly taken all those Midwestern states, and he's pretty solid in Pennsylvania, he's up in Florida, he's up in North Carolina, and Trump is fighting for his life to hang on to Texas or Georgia or something, there's no scenario there. So something like that is so likely just by looking at the numbers. So anyway, try to be humble about it. I could be wrong. Again, there's a lot of things that can happen, and I like just doing the analysis, and we'll see what happens. Looks like people are just having a good old time there talking, and who knows, I probably won't read it. Anyway, folks, have a good one, and